The Plated Ones from YouTube asked, did the Victorians Braveheart, quote unquote, Highland wear? It seems like they made their own thing and we lost the practicality and freeform nature of Highland wear that came before the Victorians. And I think he's basically using the term Braveheart to suggest that they just kind of make up something they thought looked good and looked right, the way the movie known as Braveheart did, to everyone's chagrin.
Yeah. Yes, no, and kind of. It was reinvented, shall we say, or reinvigorated in the 1810s, 1820s. So what existed before the Jacobite risings were more great kilts, and it was done a particular way. And then with the prescriptions, there was a period, forget how many years.
40 years.
40 years?
About 40 years.
Yeah, roughly 40 years, where it wasn't done. It was illegal to wear the Highland dress. Tartans weren't illegal, but wearing Highland dress was illegal. So it kind of fell out of fashion and people just didn't do it. And there was no, passed down here rules or conventions of here's how it's done, here's why it's done, that kind of thing. So when it came time for the King's visit in 1822, it was Sir Walter Scott and those of his peers, his ilk, kind of had to reinvent it and had to bring it forth again so that it wouldn't just get lost to the sands of time, to history. So they had to do something, and since there wasn't a thing to point to and say this is how it was done, do it this way, they kind of had to fill in the gaps a bit. So I wouldn't say they were bravehearting it or making it up just to mock it for something to do, but they were making it up to some degree or filling in the gaps to make sure and ensure that it had a way forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I will quibble with the details a tiny bit.
Feel free.
But essentially, yeah, basically, we all know that the Victorians and people before them, honestly, also were guilty of passing all history that they encountered through their own cultural filters. We all do this; it's human nature, but they were particularly good at it. So yes, did they make things up to fill in the gaps where they didn't know any better? Absolutely. Did they care that they were making it up? Not so much. But the thing is, a lot of the elements that they were using actually did predate that period. So like the philibeg, the short kilt, the walking kilt, is an 18th century invention. It was a civilian invention as well as a military innovation. I'm not sure which came first. That's probably a chicken and egg thing to a degree. But we do know that at some point, the British Army pretty early on realized, because the troops were complaining, that wearing a great kilt into combat and in marching formations was a major pain in the ass. So they went from the full great kilt to a walking kilt. So that was a kilt that people in the Regency period, which is technically the time period that we're talking about with Walter Scott, were familiar with. I think you do have some people who are trying to wear something like a great kilt, and that's probably where you have the invention of the fly plaid, because they were trying to get that look without having the cumbersomeness of a full great kilt. You have pictures of guys wearing a great kilt even in the late 18th century. But they started to add things on to make it more fun. They basically turned it from practical clothing into an art form. And the result of that was something called the revival suit, the Highland revival suit. And that was the precursor of what we consider to be standard formal Highland dress now. And Rosie Wayne talks about that in her book. That's the bulk of what her book is about. It was happening before Scott, but it came to a head because of him and the royal visit in 1822. Because suddenly you had this occasion, you had a deadline. And it's like, well, I got to make this thing because I'm told as a clan chief or a high-ranking elite, I'm supposed to wear it to this ball that they're hosting, and they won't let me in if I'm not wearing the old garb of the Gaul. Okay, fine, but all my suits look like this. How am I going to make this work with this kilt thing? And so they started tinkering around with the tailoring and the shapes and the accessories and all that kind of stuff. And they took what the military had preserved and what scraps of things had been preserved from the old times, and they made it artsy, for lack of a better word. So
now, he was talking, and I apologize, I was going back to pre-Victorian times. He was talking about Victorian.
A lot of people do that.
Victorians do it. Yeah, it's not a sliding scale, but it's this is what led to that. So there was Sir Walter Scott helped to invent it, or kind of came up again, filled in the gaps and that kind of thing. And then the Victorians, through the height of the tartan craze, kind of invented things and further filled in more gaps and just kind of played with it. And
they took that haggis and they ran with it.
They were developing the style. I mean, like what we think of today wasn't really codified for traditional Highland dress wasn't codified really until like the 1910s, 1920s is essentially when you think of a guy wearing a kilt to a formal function. That's generally the time frame people are thinking of, with a Prince Charlie jacket and vest and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So before then, it was a little bit of a Wild West type scenario, where kind of a little bit of an anything goes, kind of a little bit more fashion-y driven. And then it kind of settled in a particular area. And I would say now, but it settled there for a while. So if we say it started settling there in, let's say, the 1890s through the 1930s, and it's sort of stuck, and now it's been that way until, even to some degree, up until today, but now people are starting to play with it again.
I think people are playing with it more now, but I think you could say that period of time is when things started to ossify, as they say. Is like, this is how it's supposed to be done if you are dressed properly. And it's now traditional, so we're not going to mess with it. But first of all, personal opinion, I don't think that if they Bravehearted it, in many ways, they didn't Braveheart it in a bad way. Again, the trends that they decided to play with were already pre-existing in the late 18th century. And frankly, a gray kilt is a pain in the ass to wear, except in certain circumstances. Now, we have plenty of people who are wearing them casually now and having some fun with it. But I personally prefer a walking kilt like we have now. So in some ways, I think they made it more wearable for more people. They gave us a full system, and they came to the realization in the process early on that the kilt was the main thing that you had to care about. You could integrate it into modern fashion, and there was nothing wrong with doing that, because it was a trickle-down thing with the elites who had the money to play with it downward. They said, well, this is what I think is fashionable. I want to wear the kilt with this. And we've had that ever since. If you look at other national dress from other countries, it looks like something out of the freaking Middle Ages or the Renaissance. It has not changed at all, because it's much more of a uniform. Whereas kilts can be integrated with whatever the fashion is now. So they did us a favor. The biggest example, I think, of Bravehearting things is not the clothing itself. It's the tartans. Your favorite example. It's the Sobieski Stuarts.
Yeah.
They totally Bravehearted the hell out of it. They invented stuff which they said was medieval, which did not exist. So
now they just pulled it out of their ass.
They
literally just made things up that didn't exist, because there was a desire, there was a public hunger for tartans, and for new tartans, and for wanting to associate themselves, or not the Sobieskis, but individuals wanted to associate themselves with their own clan tartans. So they were hungry for it, and the Sobieskis were like, "You want a Leslie tartan? Oh, okay, here you go. Here's Leslie. There you go." And, back to, the conspiracy theorists of the day, the mills kind of played a part in it. They were like, okay, well, somebody else designed this. This guy wants to buy it. Who am I to say no? And they start weaving it.
Yeah.
So it all kind of feeds on itself. It's back to, my discussion with Rosie when I had my interview with her. It's this weird and beautiful confluence of consumer desire and history and business and it's all of it kind of swirled together.
Creativity.
And how it was created together and kind of moved forward.
Yeah.
So
So did they? Yeah. I don't think it was always a bad thing. They didn't as much as people think they did. The whole thing about the Victorians invented Scottish tradition is kind of a myth. It's there's truth to it, but it's not like people use that as a diss. Say like, oh, your traditions are just, they were all invented in the 19th century. They're not really old. So like, well, that's not true. We have a video program note. Let me make a break here so we can add this. Good answer there, Rocky. Thanks. Hope that helped. Programming note: we have a video that we did on the R. McKeon prints, which will be coming out very soon. Our videographer producer Adam made it for us, and it is, if I may say so, very good. And we'll be publishing that pretty soon. So that addresses this very topic. And we also have a project on the Wallace sword, which is in the works, which kind of touches on this as well. So look for those coming in the next few weeks. And that's about all I'm going to say.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Did the Victorians Braveheart up Highland wear and screw it up and screw up the old ways of doing things? Or were they just helping it along and ensuring its survival? I'm curious to know what you guys think of what they did. Let us know in the comments.